Well, it's been a wild week here in Orger Creek, Wisconsin, my hometown. The coronavirus civil war continues to escalate between those that believe that the pandemic represents the end of days, the mask wearers and social distancers, the sanitizers, the toilet paper preppers, the social media shamers, and on the other side there are those who see it as nothing more than overblown hype, and they wave the whole thing off as just another flu. Unfortunately for the corona skeptics, the governor has sided with the corona doomers, issuing a statewide mask mandate. Unfortunately for the doomers, the skeptics really just don't give a shit. But the mask mandate breathed new life into the COVID Combat Community Patrol, which, if you remember from a few episodes back, is a sort of neighborhood snitch program conceived and implemented by Orger Creek's notorious busybody, Karen Anderson, at the beginning of the statewide lockdown that happened back in March. Now, the COVID Combat Community Patrol continues harassing neighborhoods in their uniform red masks. And at first, people just tolerated the CCCP, regarding them with little more than a shrug and an eye roll. Busybodies will do as busybodies do, after all. But after nearly 4 months of being unable to do anything outside of their homes without encountering this pestilence, public sentiment began growing overtly hostile. The mask mandate only fueled that hostility. Everything seemed to break Tuesday morning when 11-year-old Simon Winoski and his 9-year-old sister Sarah unexpectedly found themselves in the middle of the emerging corona war they had no idea was even happening. It was around 8 in the morning when they had gone outside to play on this gorgeous August Tuesday. Actually, they had been sent outside to play by hungover parents who were awakened to the siblings fighting over the last of the breakfast cereal. And it wasn't long into the fight before their father Mitch, a burly, bearded biker, appeared in the kitchen doorway. He didn't look angry. He didn't say a word. He was always stone-faced, as though he were playing poker with life. He had little difficulty grabbing each of his children, one in each hand, and tossing them out the front door like small bags of trash. The door was then shut behind them, and the lock bolted into place. Simon immediately turned on his sister. "Way to go, dumbass," he shot at her. "I was supposed to play Fortnite with Kyle this morning." "It's your fault. You're the dumbass," Sarah replied. "You could have just shared some of the Fruitios, but no. I'm glad you can't play Fortnite with Kyle." The fighting immediately commenced. One would think that it's unfair for a boy 2 years older than his little sister to beat on her in the way that Simon did, but unfortunately for Simon, he was the one that got the bulk of his mom's genes, slender, small, while his little, quote, sister had her dad's build. So it was like watching a minivan crashing into a tank over and over again as they rolled through the grass, swearing at each other, and finally coming to a stop with Sarah sitting on top of Simon, alternately backhanding the boy across each side of his face while he tried grabbing her arms to stop the onslaught. "I'd slap you with the front of my hand," Sarah yelled between slaps, "but you're too much of a little bitch for that." At this point, the girl was starving for lack of breakfast and relished taking out her hanger on her brother's face. But suddenly Simon's gaze became fixed on something over her left shoulder, and his already somewhat buggy eyes popped out of his head. "Whoa, look!" he exclaimed through the barrage of bitch slaps. Sarah immediately stopped and looked up behind her. "Holy shit!" There's a big oak tree that sits in the front yard of the Winoski residence, and almost entirely hidden among the large late summer leaves, what can only be described as a giant silver cocoon hanging from one of the large branches about 7 feet from the ground. The children picked themselves up from the front lawn and headed over to investigate the strange anomaly. The children cautiously approached the strange silver bulge, and were soon standing directly under it, looking up at a person who had been duct taped to the tree branch, and so thoroughly duct taped in place that only the head was left exposed, except for a piece of tape that was securely fastened over the mouth. The person's eyes were closed. "Are they dead?" Sarah whispered. Simon looked around and grabbed a long stick from the ground. He slowly raised the stick to start poking at the center of the duct-taped cocoon. Nothing. Maybe they were dead. The children looked at each other wide-eyed. Neither were yet sure if finding a dead body would be an exciting or a horrifying experience, and inwardly they wondered if they were ready for the life of someone who had found a dead body. Getting no response from his poking, Simon gave the bulge a slight whack. Still no response. Simon then whacked the bulge like he was trying to break open a piñata, a whack that sounded like a small gunshot that echoed through the neighborhood. And that did it. The person's eyes flew open and muffled screams began emitting from the taped-up mouth. The children jumped at the sudden flurry of activity, and both were simultaneously overcome with disappointment at not having found a dead body. Simon had already been imagining how amazing it would be to tell Kyle about the dead body in his tree. Now he was just going to have to settle for telling him about a live body in his tree. Just didn't seem to carry the same weight of mystery and intrigue. So the person was too high up for the children to reach, so they had to go back into the house, where they anxiously hit the doorbell and banged on the door until the bulky silhouette of their father appeared in the frosted glass with Mom, Annie, right behind him. The children didn't even really know what to say to their parents about the weird situation. All they could do was point. The Winoski patriarch broke his poker game with life and actually raised an eyebrow at the weird scene in his front yard. "What in the fuck?" Mom whispered. The children followed their parents over to the duct tape cocoon, where their dad reached up and pulled some of the tape away from the person's mouth. This immediately unleashed a torrent of babbling. "Oh, thank God. Thank you, sir. We need to call the police. Some people thought it would be funny to tape me in this tree, and I've been up here all night. Thank you for finding me." On and on he gushed while Mitch Winoski looked him over. Noticing the notorious red mask, he only then interrupted the torrent of breathless babbling. "You one of those community patrol assholes?" he asked the duct tape man, who was instantly taken aback by the question. "Well, I mean, we're just trying to ensure that our community is keeping the spread of COVID-19 contained and the duct tape went back over his mouth again. "That's what I thought," Mitch said. "Maybe don't fuck with people if you don't want to sleep in a tree," was Mitch's response. Annie Winoski pulled her phone from her PJ pants pockets to smilingly snap some pictures, while Mitch tasked Sarah with fetching his hunting knife and Simon with fetching his stepladder. He then proceeded to cut the man from the tree. The only piece of tape he didn't cut away was the duct tape which he left over his mouth. With a painful drop to the ground, the man pulled away his muzzle and thanked everyone again before scurrying off to wherever he came from. As Mitch Winoski and his children watched the man quickly scurry off down the sidewalk, the father used it as a teaching moment for his children. "That guy's an asshole who doesn't mind his own business and got what he deserved. Don't be an asshole and mind your own business." The children nodded. He then pointed to the stepladder and the hunting knife. "Now go put my shit away so I can go make some coffee." So this was the first sign that people had finally had enough of the CCCP's relentless bullying. Annie Winoski's pictures went to Instagram and Facebook and immediately went viral locally. The post emboldened others to take similar action, and soon a groundswell of resistance was manifesting itself in a variety of ways, all making their way to social media. There was Adam Cousino's TikTok video entitled "Karen Hunting." With a bunch of the boys laying in the back of his pickup truck armed with paintball guns, they turned a CCCP volunteer into a Jackson Pollock art piece over on Michigan Avenue. Over on Center Street, some person or persons unknown had kidnapped Marlene Augusto's beloved cat, Mr. Whiskers, leaving a ransom note that demanded she resign from the CCCP. Marlene Augusto took to social media declaring that she would no longer be patrolling her neighborhood, and, as promised, Mr. Whiskers reappeared in her yard unscathed. By mid-afternoon, it seemed as though people were actively trying to outdo each other with the havoc they could unleash upon the town's misguided and unsuspecting do-gooders, and the posts were displayed like trophies to be shared hundreds, if not thousands, of times. Some had even started planning sweet revenge on the CCCP the day before. There was one plot in particular that didn't make it onto social media at all, but deserves to be recorded here in the Orger Creek Chronicles. Still irritated at having been chased out of the skate park and frustrated that the park continued to be monitored and patrolled, 12-year-olds Joey Reynolds, Carlos Ortiz, and Timmy Craik had been plotting how they would strike back. See, the problem with patrolling your own neighborhood is that you can't really hide your face behind a red CCCP mask. You're going to be recognized by at least a few of your neighbors. And since Carlos and Joey lived in that neighborhood, they knew exactly who their targets were. It It was two retired old men, Tom Banke and Gary Ostrowski, who were best of friends, partly because nobody else in the neighborhood happened to like them very much, and these two men spent their days tending their lawns and complaining about Donald Trump in particular and Republicans in general. They hated Republicans. They were men with minds ruined by the toxicity of politics and thus made everything in their lives about politics. Which is why they don't get invited to neighborhood barbecues by people who just want to have a good time and talk about the weather and the Packers. Well, they happen to live next to the skate park, so they were tasked by the CCCP to keep a vigilant eye on everything over there. So they had not only been right there to chase the boys away from their favorite hangout, but even went so far as to cordon off the entire park with yellow caution tape. To the boys, it felt like exile from their own nation, and in their pre-teenage minds, this simply could not be allowed to stand. When you're a child, you're always told to stand up for yourself, but nobody really ever specifies whether that means standing up only to other children or to also standing up to adults. They only knew that they were going to stand up for themselves regardless of who was bullying them. So since being evicted from the skate park, revenge had burned in them. But what could they do? Would they toilet paper the houses? Well, each one of their dads would beat their asses for wasting TP. You'd never come between a father and his toilet time, so TP was out of the question. So what? A drive-by egging? It's good in theory, but not good enough for Joey. He didn't want to punish their houses, he wanted to punish them. Eggs still seemed like a good idea, but only if they were rotten. Water balloons was another idea, but hitting them with water on a warm, sunny day seemed more like a treat than a punishment. But what if the water balloons were filled with something else? Say, something that would stain their clothes, or shaving cream, or what about piss? And that was it. Piss. It was the moment the three boys' devilish scheme came to fruition, like the fruit upon the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they plucked and ate, and at that moment the clouds parted, releasing the heavenly light upon them as a choir of angels sang a chorus of piss-soaked old busybodies. It would be glorious. But piss was just the beginning. There would be more to the fiendish plot. Much more. The night before, the boys would spend the night at Joey's house. Right before bed, they would all load up on copious amounts of asparagus and get that asparagus rotten egg pea smell by the next morning. As much as the boys hated asparagus, they loved their mission more. Timmy and Carlos even gagged a few times trying to choke it down, but they all managed. They prepared 3 empty spray bottles and a couple of packs of water balloons from the dollar store. They would use these bottles to fill the water balloons. So the next morning, they would take turns in the bathroom, filling up the bottles with the foul asparagus piss that had been fermenting in their guts all night. And from there, the piss bottle would go on top of Joey's garage, where they would sit atop black shingles baking in the sun. The rest of the morning was spent playing Fortnite and watching BMX videos on YouTube and fantasizing how great it was going to be, unleashing their wrath upon those stupid boomer assholes. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, they were headed to the skate park, each with an ice cream pail full of the hot, rank piss water balloons. They tucked each pail out of sight and ripped down all the caution tape and proceeded to show off their biking skills to each other. The trap was set, and sure enough, not 20 minutes had passed before Tom and Gary could be seen angrily approaching. "Gentlemen," Tom bellowed through his red mask as they approached, "you have already been told that you cannot be here, and if you don't leave promptly, the police will be notified." The boys took up their position near the hidden ice cream pails as nonchalantly as possible, pretending not to hear what he was saying and bringing the men closer, bringing them within range. Joey stood to the left, Carlos to the right, and Timmy in the center, and soon the old men stood in the middle of what was soon to be the firing zone. It was a flanking maneuver that would have made the Art of War author Sun Tzu proud. As Joey distracted them by arguing, Carlos and Timmy unleashed the first wave, one balloon exploding on Tom's back and the other catching Gary across the side of his face, soaking right into his cloth mask and making his nose ground zero to the explosion of rank fluid, to which he instantly started gagging. Joey followed up with his own barrage, another headshot. A mushroom cloud of stench had filled the skate park before the piss-soaked men even realized they had been ambushed. After some vain attempts to order the boys to stop, followed by some equally vain threats about telling their parents and calling the police, the men could do nothing but retreat, pursued by the boys until their ice cream pails were empty. Joey called after them in triumph. "This is our skate park, and don't you forget it, and leave us the fuck alone, or I'll tell my parents you molested me." The boys burst out laughing at this. In the back of their minds, both Carlos and Joey knew full well that they could possibly catch hell from their parents, but right now in this moment of victory, it didn't matter. After that, the boys rode off to find something else to do, simply because they needed to let their skate park air out a little bit, because it fucking stank. Now, the three Karens who were the brain trusts behind the COVID Combat Community Patrol, Karen Anderson, Karen Miller, and Karen Krajewski, the Triple K as Karen Anderson liked to call them, seemingly unaware that there was already an organization with the name KKK, could do nothing but watch their fragile volunteer program begin to evaporate before their eyes. They were outraged to see their acolytes abused in so many ways, and made numerous demands for redress from both Mayor Bjornsson and Police Chief Callum. But it was very clear which way the winds of town sentiment were blowing, and both had lived in Orgeor Creek long enough to know that those winds will turn into a tornado if you mess with it. So Police Chief Callum responded with an empty promise to consider any complaints brought to his department, but they were simply not going to be able to use their resources to actively enforce the governor's edict. Mayor Bjornsson similarly told the Triple K that if they wanted to take responsibility to enforce the governor's orders, that was fine, but they would also have to accept whatever backlash came from it. Now, the most difficult thing for any Karen to understand is that there could possibly be any negative consequences for their actions. After all, everything they did was to save lives, improve community safety and community aesthetics, and save children, etc. How could people possibly be against such noble aims? Never does it dawn upon a Karen that people may get somewhat annoyed with their incessantly meddling noble aims and might want to resist that. In short, both the mayor and police chief very politely told the Karens to fuck off, but of course no Karen has ever just fucked off. So with no manager to complain to, they immediately took to Facebook to complain about the state of the local political establishment, pointing out how eager the mayor and chief seemed to be to just sit back and watch people die. While other members of their gaggle chimed in with their own dire predictions of piles of bodies in the streets and outrages over having no one to protect them from their apocalyptic imaginings, most people chimed in with snark, sarcasm, praise for both the mayor and the chief, and of course reposting as many pictures and videos as they could from the day's uprising. By the end of the week, the CCCP was essentially in shambles. There was little support for their efforts, and the army of foot soldiers had retreated from the streets. Somehow, when one is drenched in enough piss, or duct taped to enough oak trees, or pummeled by enough paintballs, or have enough pets kidnapped, that they don't tend to feel as strong about enforcing the governor's edicts as they had before they knew there would be such a backlash. And so the CCCP was driven back into their homes to resume bitching online where no one gave a shit. It wouldn't reemerge, and soon the Triple K turned their attention elsewhere while people just generally went on with their lives, looking forward to what was left of the beautiful summer ahead. And that's the latest from Orgeor Creek, Wisconsin this week, where the beer is thick, the cheese is fresh, and the Packers are above average. So if you're enjoying this podcast, share it with the people you love. Don't keep good things to yourself. And if you really enjoy this podcast, give it a thumbs up on the Facebook page at facebook.com/Dairy State Pub Crawl. And if you really, really enjoy this podcast, consider throwing a buck or two into my beggar's cup over at patreon.com/Dairy State.